Hello everyone. In this session, I am going to discuss about Jacobean Age, whose time period is 1603 to 1625. Jacobean Age was a period in British history that lasted during the reign of King James I, whose time period is 1566 to 1625. The Jacobean Age describes the visual arts and literature produced during that time. It was also an influential period for architecture. One of the most important development of the Jacobean Age was the creation of the King James Version of the Bible, which came out in 1611. The King James Bible is considered the most successful English translation and proved highly influential for English literature. Many of the development in visual art were influenced by the influx of foreign artists living in England. At the time, the period saw a significant rise in literature, which can be seen as a continuation of Elizabethan era that preceded it. With many female authors active across both ages, the literary style of the Jacobean age is considered both dark and questioning. Shakespeare wrote many of his most famous tragedies during this period, and metaphysical poets also came to prominence. The Jacobean age was a highly influential and rich historical period in drama, prose, and poetry. Three prominent plays still produced today are from William Shakespeare. These include the play King Lear, which was published in 1605, Macbeth 1606, and Othello 1603. Famous tragedies and hint towards the darker tone that became popular during the Jacobean age. The playwright and poet Ben Jonson produced comic plays rich in satire and founded a new form of theatre known as the masque. Two distinct forms of poetry originated during the Jacobean age, the cavalier and the metaphysical. The main characteristic of this age are dark theme, questioning the social order, and the use of conceits in the poetry. So let's see the writers of Jacobean age. The first writer is Ben Jonson, whose birth is in 1573 and he died in 1637. It is believed that his moral conduct was a result of his mother's influence on him. Ben Jonson, with his contemporary writer Dagger, Mawson, and Campman, he wrote a work, Eastward. Hoy. It is a work in which Scottish life and criticized this work infuriated the King James I, who belongs to Scottish destiny. In Scotland belonged King James I of England was the King James IV of Scotland. So he got infuriated by this work because English writers made fan of his ancestors. He punished all of them, but Jonson escaped and hid himself. His mother approached Ben Jonson and she asked him he has done, but Jonson denied. And at the same evening, Ben Jonson's mother tried to kill him by giving him poison, but being a mother, at the last moment, she told him that it is poison, you should not eat. And Jonson asked, why did she try to kill him? Because Ben Jonson is coward and he is not daring enough to take the responsibility of the written work. Then Jonson went and surrendered. After a few months, they were released. Ben Jonson was a muscular person. His father was a clergy and he killed his fellow actor, but he was pardoned because of his father's status. Ben Jonson is the first writer to use comedy of humor in English. Comedy of humor was the classical style, and it simply believes that every human body has four different types of hormones or fluids. The four fluids are chloric, melancholic, blood, falcon. But if we find any kind of disbalance in these four fluids, they create comical behavior or comical nature. This is also called the Wagler art. Ben Jonson imitated the comedy of humor from the Grecian writer Plautus. Plautus has famously written a work called Poet of Gold. Ben Jonson's famous work are Every Man in His Humour, which was published in 1598. It has the famous character Novel. Novel was performed by Shakespeare, and Novel has a bad habit which is called comedy of humor of suspecting everyone. Every Man Out of His Humor. It was published in 1599. Next work is Cynthia's Rebel, which was in 1600. Next is Potestius, which was in 1601. It was a satire against Ben Jonson's contemporary writer Thomas Dacre and Thomas Marson. Dacre answered this attack by writing Satyromastic. In 1599, the bishop and church authorities they launched a rule. They said now no comedy, no satire, and no poetry which hurt someone's emotion will be written by anyone. It is famously called the bishop ban. The bishop they banned all types of vulgar satire, all types of personal criticism, which is called lampoon. Ben Jonson also supported this idea, but Dacre and Marston, who were against this idea, they thought it was the violation of freedom of writing. Jonson supported this, saying this Dacre and Marston criticized him. Then Ben Jonson criticized them. This is how they started writing play, books, satiring each other, which is famously called War of Theatres. The next work is Valfum, Alchemist, Appian, whose subtitle is Silent Woman. Ben Jonson was a lyricist. The most famous lyric is Drink to me with only thine eyes. The next writer of Jacobean Age was George Chapman, whose birth is in 1559 and he died in 1634. He has translated Iliad and Odyssey in 1616. His famous work is Blind Beggar of Alexandria. After Ben Jonson, George Chapman used comedy of humor. The next writer is John Marston, whose time is 1576 to 1634. His famous work is Antonio and Meledio. Antonio falls in love with Melida, but Melidia's father doesn't agree to the marriage after certain debates. Problem or crucial thing, Melida's father gives his consent for the marriage and they are happily married. This is the first part, which is comedy. Then Marston has written a sequel, Antonio's Revenge. In this book, we find that though the father of Melida was agreed on the marriage, but in secret he was plotting against his own daughter and son-in-law. He makes Antonio's friends, relatives die, and when Melida realizes it is my father who has deceived everyone, she commits suicide, feeling guilty. Then Antonio takes revenge of girls' death and other things. This sequel is the tragedy. End of the story comes through the mask. And the next writer is John Fletcher, whose time is 1579 to 1626, and Francis Beaumont, whose time is 1584 to 1660. Their famous work is The Maid's Tragedy. The next writer is Thomas Heywood, whose time is 1570 to 1641. His famous work is A Woman Killed with Kindness. The whole story is of Matthew Frankfurt and his wife Annie. Frankfurt has a good friend, Wendell. They both stay together, and one day Frankfurt has a bit with Wendell. If Wendell can seduce his friend's lady, he will win the bet. So Wendell does everything to seduce the lady, and finally he becomes successful in seducing the lady. Frankfurt, seeing this, that his wife is not honest to him, he simply ignores her, leaves her all alone, doesn't pay attention to her. This is how lady realized her mistake, and she tries to kill herself by starving. Then, seeing the condition of lady, Frank pardons her wife and they become happily involved in their life. A woman killed with kindness, it became a term in Elizabethan age, how to kill a woman with kindness. It was translated in William Painter's Palace of Treasure in 1566, and a plot is derived from Italian novel Salonika. The next writer is John Middleton, whose time is 1580 to 1627. His famous work is A Castor Maid in Cheapside and Hiramie Mole Yellowish. The next writer is Walter Raleigh, whose time period is 1552 to 1618. His famous works are The Discovery of Guinea and History of the World. Potato and tobacco were introduced to North America by Voltaire. Voltaire is also called Renaissance man. When Voltaire died, his preacher and friends said that right on their grave, I was friend to Voltaire and I was teacher to Voltaire. Voltaire was very influential person, was a very active member with all the talents of gentleman. It is believed that King James I himself was scared of him. Then King James I knowingly tried to kill Voltaire by giving him the orders to go to a particular area to find out the gold. On the easel end, without getting involved in any kind of fight with the Spanish army, because his plan was that the area was in Spanish territory. Voltaire went to find the gold, and the fight happened to kill many Spanish soldiers and came back with gold. But King James I made issue of this, not doing the same as king told him. This is how he arrested him and gifted to the Spaniard to maintain the good relation. And there, when Voltaire was about to be killed, he said, "This does not give me fair adieu to my friends. I have lived my life." And then he himself ordered the person to kill him. He said, "Strike, man, strike." The next writer is Thomas North, whose time is 1535 to 1604. He is the first person to translate Roman Petrarch lives into English. The next writer is Richard Hooker, whose time is 1554 to 1600. His famous work is Laws of Ecclesiastical Polity. He has written a kind history of the Church of England. And after that, metaphysical school of poetry came into the era. During the late 16th and early 17th century, the Elizabethan poetry lost its significance, and the people were no more interested in Elizabethan writers and poets. At this time, certain writers emerged whose style, pattern, and ideas were totally unique. They were not imitating any classical ideology of giving instruction or delight meant they just tried to make their works curious. The first person who has coined the term metaphysics is Drummond, who used the word metaphysics for the first time in the sense of metaphysical poetry was John Dryden. He used the word in Donne was first in certain things, and John Dryden wrote Donne's affects metaphysics. Next question is, who has coined the group of metaphysical school of poetry? It was Samuel Johnson who coined the group of metaphysical school of poetry. Samuel Johnson considered Abraham Cowley better than John Donne, and Donne was first in certain works. Donne must be a great poet, but he is not a great writer. This quote is said by John Donne himself. There are some characteristics of metaphysical poetry. The first is noble thought and action. As Elizabeth had played with words, metaphysical had played with thoughts. Next question is, who has compared lover's heart with a hand of Grendel? It was Abraham Cowley. In this frequent use of conceit, very new or far-fetched imageries, knowledge, metaphysicals were the man of learning, and to show their learning was the whole effort. After that, unification of sensibility, it is also a characteristic of metaphysicals. T.S. Eliot wrote an essay in 1921 called The Metaphysical Poets. In the metaphysical, the unification of sensibility is perceived clearly. Unconventionality, there were not imitating invocation, didactic poem. Ideas were unique in this metaphysical poetry, and archaic use of language finally was used by Chaucer to create rhyme. Some Donne used this style, and he started using letter E and other certain letters. But Ben Jonson didn't like this use of letter E. Then he said John Donne deserved hanging for not keeping accent. And love, affection, and hyperboles were also seen in metaphysical poetry. And colloquialism, which means do not use standard language, use native language in abrupt manner of starting poetry. The first writer of metaphysical poetry is John Donne, whose time is 1572 to 1631. He studies both Cambridge and Oxford. He started working for some count and secretly married Count Snice, and then he was imprisoned for this marriage because the girl was below 18. Then after 8 years he was released, but he lost all his money. He started depending on his friend. He married a girl in 1601 and they had 12 children and had nothing to eat. His friend supported him, but his friends started dying one by one, and he has written some certain works dealing with the death. Then he became famous because he started delivering religious sermons. Then in 1621 he was appointed as the dean of St. Paul Cathedral Church. His wife was Annie Murray. It is believed they were not in good times. John Donne wrote himself, John Donne, Annie Donne, undone. And his minor works are Progress of the Soul, which was published in 1601, The Anatomy of the World, which was published in 1611. It deals with the frustration, illness, and financial strain and death of his friend. The next is Devotion, which was published in 1624. It is a collection of sermon. The next is Essay in Divinity, which was published in 1651. And the next is Songs and Sonnets, which was published after the death of John Donne in 1631. The next is Death Be Not Proud. It was written in 1609 and published in 1633. Death be not proud, though some have caused the mighty dreadful. But thou art not so, thou art slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men, and do with poison where and sickness dwell. One short sleep, and we wake eternally. Dylan Thomas' famous work, Death Thou Shall Have No Dominion, has 4 lines, and done this poem is a series in Holy Sonnet, and this is serial number is 10. Next is Go and Catch a Falling Star. Go and catch a falling star, get a child from mandrake root. You can hear mermaid song. You can solve the unsolved mythologies. Who cleft Dumb's foot? You take a ride of 10,000 days and nights with the eyes to see the inscrutable. And the next is Sun Rising. Albeit is a literary device or a poem where the lovers they mourn the arrival of morning. John Donne in 17th century start abusing the Apollo sun. He says, "Busy all fool unroll. Scene, why do you do so? Peeping through the windows, we are the lovers. The bed is the center." She is all states and all princess. You should be proud of your bright rays, because the countenance of my beloved is brighter. I could eclipse you with a wing, but I cannot be afford to lose the sight of my beloved for that second. Go to the Indian mines. The next is On His Mistress Going to Bed. This poem is studied from the post-colonial point of view. It is a love story. Here, lovers are together for the first time and he exploring the body of the woman, and this exploration is taken in a colonizing way. So, woman's lady called the colony of his man, and he praises her, calling her, "Oh, my America, my Newfoundland, my safest haven," with one man. And the next and famous work of John Donne is Valediction Forbidding Mourning. As virtues men pass mildly away, and whisper their soul to go, if they be two, but so as twin compass. The next work is The Flea. Better my heart, nocturnal upon Saint Lucky's day, being shortest day. I am very dead thing of absence, darkness and dense, ecstasy, death dwell. The next writer is Andrew Marvell, whose time is 1621 to 1678. His famous work are To His Coy Mistress and A Horatian. To His Coy Mistress, this deals with the philosophy of an carpe diem, which means this is the last day of your life, and the philosophy is he is talking to his beloved who is very shy, and he is forcing her beloved for the intimate relation, but she is following the social norm, so he keeps on telling her that this is the last day, we are going to die, and if you die there will be no social norms left for you, and it is better we should make best of the time. Carpe diem term was coined by Horace, and had we but in the world enough, O lady, this coinage were no crime. Though by the Indian Ganges side, love you 10 years before the flood, till the conversation of Jews, My vegetable love should grow, but at my back I will always hear time's winged carrot hunting near. And reply to this poetry by Richard Nogin, Koi Mistress Reply to Marvel. This was Richard Koi Mistress, start abusing the boy. This is the sophomoric love, means immature love. Next is A.D. Hapes. He is an Australian writer. He has famously written a book of answers. He also written a work, Koi Mistress Reply to Marvel. In his work, the lady says we should use the time in good work like pray. The next writer is George Herbert. His time is 1593 to 1633. He is the religious writer. He has written a famous poem, Collection Temple, in 1633. It has 158 poems. In these, he talks to God as he is talking face to face. This is conversational style. Easter Wings is a famous poem in the collection of Temple. Easter Wings is an example of emblem poetry. When you write poetry in some arranged order and you create certain design and arranging the lines in a structural way to create some image, it is example of emblem poetry. The next writer is Richard Greshaw, whose time is 1613 to 1649. His famous work is Wishes to His Supposed Mistress. There is a quotation for Richard's work, neither the most important nor the least distinguishable, and stuck to the temple. Next writer is Abraham Cowley, whose time is 1618 to 1667. When he was a kid, he was reading Spenser's Fairy Queenie and got inspired. He is called the last of the metaphysicals. He has used Pindaric ode, but his Pindaric ode was not the regular Pindaric ode. He reused Pindaric ode, but with a different rhyme scheme. That's why Cowley Pindaric odes are called Pindaric odes. See the difference between C and CK. His famous work is Midsummer Night Dream, and Davies, he wrote his friend in a letter, what shall I do to be forever known and make the coming ease of my own? The next writer is Henry Vaughan, whose time is 1621 to 1695. The metaphysical writer with romantic spirit. He inspired Wordsworth and foreigner of Wordsworth. Henry was inspired by George Herbert. He belonged to a particular tribe called Celiar, and he used his name Celerist to pay homage to his tribe. And the quotation of Bishop Tripp is, as a divine workman may be inferior to Herbert, but as a poet he is certain by superior. His another famous work is Silex Clintons, which was published in 1650, and Silex Sinclair's Part 2, which was published in 1655, Qualar Iscanus, which was published in 1651, and Thalia Redivia, which was published in 1678, and Retreat. The next writer is Thomas Crewe, whose time is 1594 to 1640, half metaphysical and half classical writer, a link between Ben Jonson and John Donne. His famous work is Elegy upon Death of Dr. Donne, Poetry on Ben Jonson, Ask Me No More. It is a lyric love song to Celia. To Rapture and Ask Me No More are his best love songs. So that's all about today's session. Thank you so much for listening so carefully. If you like my video, please like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much.